was an old house, the kind you see in horror movies, tall with creaky wooden floors and windows that seemed to always rattle, no matter the weather. I inherited it from my grandparents after they passed away. My parents didn't want anything to do with it, so I took it over, figuring it would be a good place to start fresh. I never believed in ghosts or curses, so the house's eerie reputation didn't bother me. At least, not at first. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time cleaning and unpacking. The house was large, with 3 floors and a basement. The basement door was strange, though. It was located at the end of a narrow hallway on the first floor, hidden behind a heavy, dark curtain. The door itself was old and scratched, with a rusted handle that looked like it hadn't been turned in decades. Something about it unsettled me, but I brushed it off as just being a little spooked by the new place. One night while I was in bed, I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like soft tapping, almost like footsteps. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or the wind, but the sound persisted. Slowly, I got up and followed the noise. It led me to the basement door. I stood there staring at the door, feeling a growing sense of dread. The tapping continued, this time louder, coming from the other side of the door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I backed away, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I returned to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The sound of tapping echoed in my mind, long after it had stopped. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the house. I tried to ignore the basement door, but it seemed like every time I passed by, I could hear faint noises coming from behind it. Whispers, shuffling, things that didn't make any sense. I started to feel like I was being watched, even when I was alone. A few nights later, the tapping returned, this time more insistent. It was as if someone, or something, was knocking on the door, demanding to be let out. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let the fear control me, so I decided to confront whatever was behind that door. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife, I approached the basement door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. It felt ice cold, sending a shiver down my spine. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. The basement was pitch black, the air heavy and damp. The stairs creaked as I descended, each step echoing in the darkness. The smell of mold and decay filled my nostrils, and I could hear the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom, and for a moment, I thought it would go out entirely. But then, it stabilized, casting a dim, shaky light around the room. The basement was larger than I had imagined, filled with old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs. But something was off. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating, and there was a strange sense of wrongness that I couldn't quite place. As I scanned the room, my light landed on a door at the far end of the basement. It was smaller than the one upstairs, almost like a closet door, and it seemed out of place, as if it had been added later. The moment I saw the door, the tapping stopped. Silence fell over the basement, so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back upstairs and never look back. But I was drawn to that door, compelled to open it, as if something was pulling me toward it. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle. It was even colder than the one upstairs, almost painfully so. As I turned it, the door creaked open with a sound that made my skin crawl. Inside was a small, dark room, barely large enough to stand in. The walls were covered in deep scratches, and the floor was stained with something dark and foul-smelling. At first, I saw nothing, but then out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow moving. I swung the flashlight around, but the beam flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. In the pitch black, I heard something breathing, something that wasn't human. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The breathing grew louder, more frantic, and I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from inside the room anymore. It was behind me. I turned, but before I could see what it was, something cold and sharp grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. I screamed, thrashing against the invisible force, but it was too strong. I felt myself being pulled back toward the door, into the small, nightmarish room. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut behind me was a pair of glowing eyes, watching me from the darkness. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold basement floor. the door to the small room sealed shut. My flashlight was dead, and my arm was covered in scratches, as if I'd been clawed by something. I scrambled to my feet and ran upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I locked it, barricaded it, and swore I would never go down there again. But even now, I can still hear it. The tapping, the whispers, the sound of something moving in the darkness. The basement door may be locked, but I know it won't hold forever. And when it finally opens, I'm terrified of what will come out. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you're brave enough for more, hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found a door that leads to a nightmare? It started as a faint echo, something so subtle that I almost didn't notice it. I was in the middle of a routine work call, pacing around my living room, when I heard it for the first time. I had just ended the call with a simple, "Talk to you later," when a second voice, distant yet clear, repeated my words exactly. "Talk to you later." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I live alone, and it was the middle of the day. The voice wasn't coming from my phone, and there was no one else in the house. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks, maybe some odd echo from the call. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few days, the voice became more persistent. It wasn't just repeating things I said out loud. It began mimicking my thoughts too. I would think something as simple as, "I need to go to the store." And there it was, a soft whisper, echoing in the back of my mind. I need to go to the store. It was like someone, or something, was inside my head, mocking me. At first I tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but it only grew louder, more insistent. The voice was always there no matter what I did, repeating every word, every thought. It was driving me mad. I stopped talking to people, terrified they might hear it too. I even began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if I was losing my mind. But then one night everything changed. It was late and I was sitting in my bedroom trying to distract myself with a book. The voice had been unusually quiet that evening, and for the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, it was gone. But as soon as I let my guard down, it returned with a vengeance. I had just thought I should get some sleep, when the voice, now clearer than ever, whispered back, "I should get some sleep." I snapped the book shut, my heart racing. This wasn't just an echo. It felt deliberate, malicious, like something was taunting me. I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Grabbing my coat, I hurried downstairs and out the front door into the cold night air. But the voice followed me. As I walked down the empty street, every step filled with dread, the voice continued to mimic my thoughts. "Where am I going?" I wondered, and the voice echoed back, "Where am I going?" I quickened my pace, desperate to escape it, but the voice only grew louder, more mocking. I could feel it inside my head, as if it were burrowing deeper into my mind. I ended up at a small park on the edge of town, hoping the fresh air and open space would clear my mind. But the moment I sat down on a bench, the voice returned, this time with a question. "Why are you here?" It was the first time it had said something that I hadn't thought myself. Panic surged through me. The voice wasn't just an echo. It was something else entirely, something with a mind of its own. I stood up, ready to run, but the voice spoke again, this time more forcefully. "Don't leave." I froze, my legs trembling. The voice was no longer just in my head. It was coming from somewhere behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there, just the empty park, bathed in the dim glow of a street lamp. But the voice persisted, now almost amused. "You can't escape me." I began to run, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The voice followed me, growing louder, more sinister with every step. "Run all you want," it sneered. "I'm always with you." I didn't stop running until I reached my house, slamming the door shut behind me. But as I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, I realized that I hadn't escaped. The voice was still there, whispering in my ear, "You can't run from me." I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do, how to make it stop. The voice had taken over every part of my life, every thought, every word. It was relentless, cruel, and there was no way to shut it out. Then, as I sat there, trembling with fear, the voice asked a new question, one that sent a chill through my entire body. "Why don't you let me in?" I didn't understand what it meant at first, but then the voice began to change. It no longer echoed my thoughts. Instead, it started planting new ones, dark and twisted. It whispered terrible things I would never think on my own. "Let me in," it insisted, over and over again. "Let me in." I tried to fight it, but the voice was too strong. It was no longer just an echo. It had become a part of me, a presence that I couldn't ignore or escape. And as the days turned into weeks, I felt myself slipping away, losing control to the voice that had taken over my mind. Now I can barely tell where my thoughts end and the voice begins. It's always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, waiting for the moment when I finally give in. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The voice is winning, and soon it will have me completely. If you ever hear a voice repeating your thoughts, don't ignore it. Don't let it in, because once it takes hold, there's no escaping it. And if you're already hearing it, it may be too late. Did this story send chills down your spine? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if a voice started repeating everything you say? It was a quiet, uneventful evening like any other. The kind where you settle into your favorite chair with a book, or maybe a cup of tea, and let the world drift away. My small house, tucked away in a sleepy neighborhood, had always been a sanctuary. Nothing ever happened here, until that night. I had just finished watching a late-night movie when I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the backyard. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but something about it seemed off, persistent. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing a flashlight, I headed toward the back door. The night was unusually still, the air thick with an eerie silence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. As I stepped out onto the porch, the beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the familiar outline of my yard. The sound had stopped, and for a moment, I considered turning back. But then, I saw it. A dark shape near the far corner of the yard, partially hidden by the tall grass. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shape was too large to be an animal, and the way it lay there, motionless, sent a chill down my spine. Slowly, I moved closer, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet the only sound in the oppressive quiet. When I reached the edge of the yard, my heart pounding in my chest, I finally saw it clearly. It was a body. I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the reality of it was too overwhelming. The body, lying face down in the dirt, was that of a man. His clothes were torn, and his skin, pale and lifeless, seemed to glow under the flashlight's harsh beam. I wanted to scream, to run back into the safety of my house, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away. Who was he? How did he end up here? My mind was flooded with questions, but there were no answers, only the grim reality of the corpse before me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to call the police, get help, do something. But before I could move, something even more terrifying happened. The body moved. At first, it was just a twitch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But then, the man's hand slowly clenched into a fist, and his head began to turn. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight as I watched in horror. This wasn't possible. He was dead. I was sure of it. But now he was moving, and he was looking at me. The man's eyes, glassy and vacant, locked onto mine. His mouth opened, and a low guttural sound emerged like a growl or a groan. It was the sound of something that shouldn't be alive. My heart pounded in my ears as I took another step back, but the man was already getting to his feet, his movement slow and unnatural, as if he were a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I turned and ran, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted toward the house. I could hear him behind me, the rustling of the grass growing louder. Closer. I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting inside, locking the door, and calling for help. But as I reached the porch, something grabbed my ankle. I fell hard, the flashlight flying from my hand and skidding across the porch. Pain shot through my leg as I twisted around to see the man's pale, bony fingers wrapped around my ankle. his face now only inches from mine. His skin was cold, deathly cold, and his breath reeked of decay. I kicked out with my free leg, desperate to break free, but his grip was like iron. "No!" I screamed, thrashing wildly. With one final desperate effort, I managed to pull myself free and scramble up the steps. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it at him, but he was already on his feet again, slowly advancing toward me. There was no escape. He was too close. Just as I reached for the door handle, the man stopped. His head jerked to the side as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. For a moment, he just stood there staring at nothing, his body trembling. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the yard. I didn't wait to see where he went. I burst into the house, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, asking for my address, what had happened, if I was safe. But all I could do was stare at the back door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, the man was gone. They searched the yard, the surrounding woods, but there was no trace of him. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The officers looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism, but I knew what I had seen. There was a body in my backyard and it had come back to life. I still don't know what happened that night or who or what I encountered, but every time I step outside, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting. If you ever find something strange in your backyard, be careful. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Did this story give you chills? If so, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you found a body in your backyard?